Good work. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Haley Lyons, and I'm the chair of the Board of Accountancy. I am calling this special Zoom-only public meeting of the State of Oregon Board of Accountancy to order. Today is Wednesday, April 30th, 2025, and it is 12:02 p.m. This meeting is being held by Zoom with most staff participating from the board offices on 200 Hawthorne Avenue Southeast, Suite D450, Salem, Oregon 97301. This meeting is being recorded. For all Zoom participants, please be sure to mute your microphone and unmute only when you are called upon to speak. Please do not use the chat room for any discussions. Should any technical issues arise, the meeting will be paused until they are resolved. I will now take a roll call of members and guests. I'll start with whom I can see on Zoom, followed by staff at the board office. So I'm just going to call on you, and then you can just say here. Joe Sullivan.
Joe Sullivan, here.
The directions were just to say here, Joe, but thank you. But you may say your name if you feel so compelled. Logan.
Here.
Awesome. Angie.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
Sherry.
Here.
We have Megan Kurtz.
Here.
Jason Robinson.
Here.
Amanda.
Here.
Jason Orm.
Here.
Tanya Moffett.
Here.
Elizabeth Ulmer.
Here.
Raul Valdivia.
Here.
Megan Hartley.
Here.
And then we have Andrew Barlow.
Here, present via Zoom and in board office.
Awesome. And Quinn.
Here.
And then we have someone from Pittman and Brooks.
Nina Martin from Pittman and Brooks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Anybody that I missed? Great. Perfect. Okay. So the first item is agenda review and approval. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review the agenda. Does anybody have any proposed amendments? I do. So I would like to formally ask to add a short discussion about the developments in Florida in terms of their a bill that's moving through the Florida state, because I'm sure you guys have started to see some information come out about that. And I think it's good to just keep everybody up to speed on what's happening. Although since earlier today, I'm sure things have changed. So we will see how that goes. Let the record note that Rachel Reardon has joined via Zoom. Okay, public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? If there are, please use the Zoom raise hand feature. If I call on you for comment, sorry, we need to review and approve the agenda.
Yes.
Okay.
In this case, it should be with an amendment.
Yes, that's right. Awesome. Does anybody have a problem with the amendment that I proposed? Can I get a motion to approve and adopt the agenda as amended?
I move to approve the agenda as amended by the chair.
Thanks, Logan.
This is
Do you have a
Jason
second?
Robinson. I second.
Thank you, Jason. And so we will need to do a roll call vote, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Awesome. Joe Sullivan.
Aye.
Logan Steele.
Aye.
Jason Robinson.
Aye.
Raul.
Aye.
And Megan.
Aye.
And do I say aye also?
Yes.
Yes.
Haley Lyons, aye.
Unless you want to vote no.
Vote no. Okay, now we can go on to public comment. Please raise your hand using the Zoom feature. If I call on you, you will be permitted to address the board for a maximum of 3 minutes. Staff will unmute you so you can speak, although I think you may have the ability to unmute yourself. As chair, I reserve the right to end your comment early and have staff mute you if your comment does not pertain to the authority given to this board by the legislature to regulate the CPA profession and public accountancy firms in this state. Does any members of the public have any comments? Seeing none. Okay. Moving on. My report, board and committee appointment updates. The governor's office is now anticipating that a replacement for Joe will not be completed process-wise until September. Yay! So, at this time, we anticipate that either June or September will be Joe's last full board meeting. Thank you, Joe, for continuing service until then. And I wish we'd had a bit more control over the timing of that. Well, I don't, because I'm delighted, but for your sake, I can. Sorry. Okay. We had a NASBA board meeting last week. I'm just going to read this out loud because it's funny. Martin's comment to me is keep this under 1 hour. Oh, wait, your name is not Martin. So the NASBA board met on, well, the regional directors met on Thursday afternoon. And then the full board met on Friday. The big things coming out of that is that, you know, the UAA exposure draft, which we're going to talk about in new business, has a March 3rd comment period. There hasn't been a lot of comments received yet, but largely because from state boards, largely because a lot of boards haven't met. And so they're expecting to receive, you know, more comments, but also the seemingly the level of positive feedback is high. So we will have another board meeting on, I think, next week, maybe the week after, to vote on that UAA exposure draft, which is great. We talked about private equity some length. NASBA is forming a task force to kind of tackle some of the issues that are coming up. I will say publicly and on the record that I'm a little disappointed that hadn't been accelerated. I thought we were a little farther along on that because this is, you know, I mean, the horse is out of the barn like big time. And so, so now we're going to start looking at stuff, guys, and trying to figure out how we, as at the NASBA level, kind of push out any guidance to state boards from a regulation standpoint. So that's good, I guess. So we shall see what happens with that. The other hot topic was exam scores, and just that CPA exam scores are lower than they have been, and just thinking through what that means from a, I don't know, professional standpoint, and just kind of keeping our eyes on that. Granted, it's only, you know, a year into kind of new exam format, but there's definitely attention on that matter to make sure that it's the right takeaways are taken away from that and what that means. You know, it's interesting because several states lowered their credit requirement for when you could sit for the exam. Not sure that that's directly correlated, or if the exam is just the study materials aren't, you know, exactly lining up. So that was an interesting discussion. Any questions on the NASBA board meeting before we move on to new business? Okay. So new business, Martin, legislative status report update, Senate Bill 797A and 796 and House Bill 5001.
All right, so all right, thank you. So just very briefly, House Bill 5001, that's our budget bill. We had a fantastic hearing on the budget bill, very engaged, the most engaged Ways and Means subcommittee we've ever had, but it was kind of engaged in a good way. And we are now scheduled tentatively for work session on our budget for the morning of Monday, May 12. So what that also means is that I expect that process to be done by the June 3rd board meeting. That May 12 session will be done in conjunction with Senate Bill 796. So Senate Bill 796, that's the accounting scholarship bill. That bill was discussed in the context of the budget hearing because we have the policy option package that the board asked for and authorized and the governor supported for the funding for this is in that budget bill. So even though at that time the bill itself was not in Ways and Means, it was discussed during the budget hearing, which will become important in a moment. So the scholarship bill itself, the substantive bill, was heard in the Education Committee on the Senate side and voted out unanimously. And it's now sitting in Ways and Means also for a work session at the same time, May 12th, Monday morning, when our board budget bill will come up, right? So those two things will be fused together as they, or not fused together, but discussed together as they should be. But there's not really anticipated to be a really substantive discussion anymore at the work session. It's not about amending that bill, it's about the fiscal side, because it's the budget committee. And so, quite frankly, that's about as far as that accounting scholarship bill can go at this point, and things are still looking really good, which is not small potatoes, because I can tell you from the feedback that I'm getting that other than other funds agencies, and we are considered other funds because we're fee-based, right? Anything that has a fiscal impact, with very few exceptions, is on its course to death in Ways and Means, because there just is too much budget uncertainty and funding stressors over there. So we can consider ourselves very lucky that, and I'll say this very carefully because it's a public meeting, unlike some states in our near vicinity, we have both executive branch and legislative branch leadership that are willing to treat us differently and recognize that we are not federal funds or state income tax or general fund dependent, but essentially are existing in our own bubble, and essentially have decided at the policy level to keep the other funds agencies like us essentially outside the bucket of pain that is currently applies to agencies that have either general funds or lottery funds or federal funds type budgets. And let's not take that for granted. So things are still looking really good. Finally, best for last, on our main bill, Senate Bill 797A, everything has been unanimous on the Senate side. We had a unanimous committee vote, a unanimous floor vote. We had a fantastic hearing on Thursday last week on the House side. And just yesterday, that same committee voted us out unanimously with a small technical amendment related to the Oregon Office of Film and Video and their usage of CPAs. And we're off to the House floor now on a unanimous vote. So it's just process now. We're super close. It's super exciting. Essentially, the only thing that's left now is the floor vote. And we actually have to go back to a Senate floor vote because of that one word amendment in the House for what is called a concurrence vote. And after that, we're off to the governor. So we're super close. We're 90% of the way there.
Well, and I just to add on to that, Martin. So I'd be curious if you got a note also, but I had a student reach out via LinkedIn yesterday who said she watched the testimony, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, you did what? I mean, that's amazing, and was just really grateful for the fact that we're moving this through. And I wanted to share that gratitude with all of you guys, because we started this process a while ago, and it's taken a lot of work and dedication to get us this far. And it's really great to be able to sit at the NASBA board meeting last week and look at the map on which states are lighting up and who's doing what. and to see us be part of that discussion. I don't like being in gray on that map, which meant they're not doing anything. The thing that is going to come up next is going to be just a continued discussion around mobility, because best laid plans, right? Where little wording things and nuances kind of are coming into play that are going to create some challenges, but we have things set up really nicely to not have any issues for us and our licensees. I don't think going to other places. We may have a little trickiness in some other ways, but so thank you guys all for your work on that. It's really exciting, and hopefully by our June 3rd board meeting, we can officially celebrate. Okay, anything else on that? Any questions, other questions, comments? Nope, okay. Hello. Okay, so the Jeremiah has joined. Item 5B, UAA March 3rd, 2025 exposure draft. So our action item here is we're going to review and potentially adopt the board comments. The comments are due on May 3rd. So Martin, do you want to say anything about that? Do you want me to talk about that?
No, I mean, I can just say very briefly, you already in your chair comments, in your chair report indicated that, the comments that have come in so far are overwhelmingly positive. I can certainly hear that from my colleagues as well. I decided to keep this pretty high level. I mean, you have the detailed materials in there. I simply thought it was important to kind of continue to navigate for us. And this is kind of where, our comment is a little different than for other states. Because just to remind everyone, we are that kind of somewhat more unique pebble in the sea together with Washington and I think very few others that have had this decades-long history of competency-based experience requirements, right? And this is what was, quite frankly, got this whole thing a little bit off the wrong path from the national level, because NASBA and our comment reflects this, right? They rightfully tried to raise this, hey, is the profession ready for this kind of at the national level, what we're doing here, but they also did it in such a way that they said, if you don't, you won't be substantially equivalent, which was never our approach, right? And so it put us into this really awkward thing where on the one hand side, they were proposing something that we have been doing in a way for forever, right? But they also said this should now be the cudgel of whether you're equivalent or not. And so fortunately, they worked through that. I hope the comment reflects the sentiment that I heard from the board, that we are really grateful that they turned this around and listened. And at the same time, also still reflect that we have that competency-based history, right? And that we don't think less of them just because they raised the issue, even though the way it was done was problematic. So I hope it kind of strikes the right tone, but I'm open to feedback and edits. We do need to get this in by close of business Friday.
Yeah, did everyone have a chance to review, and does anyone have any comments or suggestions for changes to what we've provided or are proposing? Okay, we do need a motion to adopt the board comments as presented.
Jason, I don't want to step on you again. Go for it.
I'll make a motion to adopt the board comments as presented.
I second. It's Logan Steele.
Great. Any discussion? Okay, I will take a vote. Joe Sullivan,
Aye.
Logan Steele,
Aye.
Jason Robinson,
Aye.
Raul Valdivia,
Aye.
Megan Hartley,
Aye.
Haley Lyons, aye. Motion passes. I got everyone, right? Yeah, I think I did. Someone will tell me if I didn't. Okay, thanks you guys. That's great. It's exciting to be, yeah, it's again, another exciting thing. Send in our comments. I am hopeful that this is the one. Okay, next item, 2025 draft board rulemaking calendar. Martin, I will turn that over to you and Jason.
Yeah. So Jason, I will call on you a little bit to talk about the, if that's okay, Haley, to just kind of split it up, as I will simply talk about the state agency side of this. Because effectively, folks, before Jason reports on what happened at the Laws and Rules Committee meeting yesterday. So in essence, there's two things going on here that are effectively merging, right? One is that as part of our normal Laws and Rules Committee process, we will be normally planning anyway. What do we need to do and when? And the board has been in general aware that there's going to be, and we've discussed this a bit in February, that there's going to be pretty significant focus on rulemaking with all the bills that are moving through, right? So we knew we would have to do some planning. Coincidentally, at this moment is also when, from the governor's side, for all state agencies, essentially a directive was sent out that the governor wants all state agencies, not just licensing boards, literally all state agencies, to be, quite frankly, more transparent to the public about, hey, what are you doing about rulemaking and what does that look like, and kind of have a consolidated document that essentially gets published. That publication deadline for all state agencies happens to be tomorrow, May 1. So we got really lucky with the timing of this special board meeting, which was originally solely scheduled. When we scheduled it was just because to deal with the item we just dealt with, which is the UAA comments that we knew we would need to get done, right? But it now turns out that we also have to publish a document that meets certain criteria. Now, without going into all the details about what all the governor wants, simply know that that document that you have in your packet meets the criteria set by the governor's office. So there's essentially the agency and governor's expectation angle in there. But substantively underneath, what really should matter to the board is, so now check mark, okay, we're going to meet governor's expectations if we publish some version of this document. But substantively, right, what we need feedback on is, do you feel like this is reasonable and captures what we need to do from your perspective? We started that process at the LRC yesterday. Because the LRC met yesterday, so the stars were lining up with the proper process. So Jason, do you want to just talk a little bit about yesterday and the kind of small edits that happened yesterday?
Yesterday, which small, there weren't too many small edits, I don't think.
Just the meeting dates, the meeting
dates, which
yeah.
I'm looking at my calendar. So
Yeah.
Right now we have Laws and Rules Committee meetings that were previously on the books for June 3rd and June 23rd. We have now added a July 17 and an August 15th meeting for LRC to be able to work through all of this, including 797, so that we can have it to the board for your consideration and vote in September, correct, Martin?
Correct. Yes, because we do need to, if you have any chance of implementing, especially the biggest project in all of this is, substantively speaking, is of course the Senate Bill 797 implementation, right? And we know that there is no way we can meet the January 1, 2026 effective date timeline with rules ready unless we bring something to the September 25th board meeting, right? So that is kind of the main driver, and everything else is built around that. There is a second piece, which is much smaller and very unusual, and quite frankly, a real one-off that we've never done before and most likely will never have to do again, which is inside the document. You also see that there is this rulemaking package that actually, first of all, is not going to come out of the LRC, but actually out of the pipeline committee. You may recall that in February, we specifically authorized the Pipeline Committee as our expert committee on the accountancy scholarship piece to be the one dealing with the rules package, which is kind of a unique rules package around grant agreements and the framework thereof. We have to do that the way Senate Bill 796 is written, and that is even more time sensitive than the that small piece, which is kind of a standalone thing that we're actually substantively discussing on Friday in the Pipeline Committee. That has to come to the board in June already if we're going to be ready with rules that are finalized on that piece. That has to happen and be finished by the September board meeting if we're going to have essentially an ability to do an actual grant agreement execution and transfer of funds to occur in the fall to keep all of this working, right? So we have that small, unusual piece that comes early, but while that piece is in the works, essentially the LRC needs to do heavy lifting on the Senate Bill 797, the pathways piece, and bring that to the board in September. And somewhere in between, you have that kind of a important note at the very end of that document, depending on what all happens at the June board meeting, where we need to do a really in-depth discussion on kind of a policy direction on the private equity stuff to the LRC. We're going to have to figure out with the LRC somewhere along that line what we will do, some kind of a legislative concept development that could go into the 26th session. But we don't know what that looks like until we have a discussion at the June board meeting. I hope that helps, doesn't confuse the hell out of everybody.
I think it is what it it is what it is. The timing is delicate and you're always good at backing into all of the different nooks and crannies that need to be backed into. Okay, so we need a motion on adopting the 2025 rulemaking calendar.
And could we, when we do that motion, include with the amendment of adding the 2 additional LRC dates to it from July and August, please?
Yes, please. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the 2025 rulemaking calendar, including the July and August dates proposed at the LRC meeting yesterday? Set that up perfectly for us. So moved.
This is Joe Sullivan. So moved.
This is Megan Hartley, second.
Thank you. Awesome. Okay, great. Any discussion? Let's take a vote. Joe,
Aye.
Logan,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Megan,
Aye.
Raul,
Aye.
Haley, aye. Motion passes. Nice job, guys. Okay, great. Draft Board of Accountancy Immigration Policy Review and Adoption. We got an extension on this. So Angie or Martin, who wants to tackle this one?
I'll very briefly go first, and then Angie, since you really helped with this amazingly, if you can jump in as well, just on the substance here. But simply know this happens to be another one of those pieces where thankfully we have a special board meeting, because this also came we didn't know this was going to happen at the February board meeting, but we have an agency-wide governor's office deadline around agencies adopting immigration-related policies. There is a bit of a tweak regarding what that exactly looks like for every state agency, but I will simply say in the public domain that there is that this is also essentially what you have in front of you is effectively a the governor's office is asking agencies, this needs to be done, right? There was a lot of work that was done with the Department of Justice to ensure that what's coming in front of you is appropriate for a licensing agency, and there were some further edits made to make sure that it's appropriate for us. Angie, I am looking in the board packet. I do think there is one sentence left in the draft that came to the board that needs to come out before the adoption, because I think one of the items that you helped us remove around patient records, which apply to health regulatory boards, still remained in there, and I saw it too late. So it was sent out to the board with that sentence still referencing patient records, which does not apply in our scenario. So I can find that while we're talking, but do you want to just step in for a minute or two and just provide any assurances you want to provide from the DOJ side that this is solid and ready for board?
Yeah, so DOJ had put together model immigration policies for all state agencies sort of across the board that sort of like touched on all the bases of any sort of records that an agency could have in their possession that can range from a number of different things that relate to people's immigration status and things like that. And so the DOJ had put together the policies and then the governor's office asked the agencies sort of like disseminate these policies, train the staff on them, like what to do with these sorts of documents when they're in the possession, and what are the laws around whether or not those are confidential documents or not, and when they can be released in relation to what sort of requests and things like that. So that's what these are representing. They're a lot of the boards are health boards, so they have other policies that have to do with that. So I thought I had gotten all that out, and I apologize if I missed one. So patient records and things like that obviously don't apply to us. So these are the policies. And so at this point, the board would just need to adopt those if you would like to adopt them. Yes, Jason has his hand up.
Is it good to name Martin in there, or should we just say executive director? I see that Martin's name's throughout the policy.
I mean, that is just sort of fits to name an individual person. I believe that was what was suggested in the draft documents from DOJ, that you name an individual. But I mean, I would think going forward, if Martin were to leave, we would have to then obviously update the policy.
Angie, why are they asking us to adopt it now?
I do not know the answer to that. Martin, do you know?
So hang on, sorry, I'm trying to get back to my screen here because I am I just took a look at that base document here. Okay, there we go. I don't know for sure what all is going on behind the scenes there, but I do know that there was, quite frankly, given the broader national environment, there's a lot of attention to all of this. There was a mandatory all employees hands-on, and there was like a required training for all employees around, what the laws are in Oregon about what is lawful to assist with in terms of immigration enforcement and what is not lawful in Oregon. And so all employees were required to take that training that happened about roughly, I think 3 months ago. It was, I think, in January sometime already. And to me, this is kind of like the next extension, right? The training was a relatively low-hanging fruit because it was simply this is what the law is now. Let's make sure that employees understand the legal space that we're operating in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. And then this, to me, is just the next logical step in state government, that they say, okay, now we expect, these are the policies that comply with these laws. And that took a little bit longer because that's a little bit harder than training. So that's kind of what I know. But it doesn't mean that I'm really in the clue on what all happened on the, back end of the equation governor's office and other places around how that all came together.
I'll just say, and it feels political, and it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with the Board of Accountancy to me. So I actually don't have any problem with the document itself. I think it's well written, but I just don't like politics of any kind in a state agency. And that's kind of what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
But and maybe I'm misreading it. That's why I'm asking why.
No, I had the same feeling, Joe. I was like, what? This doesn't, like, it just feels very tangential to what our charge is. So, Jason, hand is up.
Hi guys, so Department of Corrections where I work is going through the same thing. So we're making sure that our staff are trained. It's just been, you could say it's political, but we're just making sure that our staff know what they can and can't hand out when it comes to immigration requests. So, and there's just been an uptick on the feds coming in and asking for that information from various people that don't normally hand out those items. So I think it might be politically in nature, but it's something that our staff have not really been trained on in a long time. So.
Yeah. No, good comment. Logan.
Do we have policies just for general law enforcement inquiries and records related to other things? Like, does that exist?
There's laws around that, like of what
Uh-huh.
we can share. We have statutes that comply.
Well, actually, it's funny that you it's good and actually really interesting you asked that. And if I remember correctly, Senate Bill 21 in the 2015 session, off the top of my head, is actually directly relevant to your question, because we actually had to run a bill in 2015 because we didn't have appropriate statutory authority to cooperate with law enforcement when it came to our own investigations. And so in that arena, but that was very directly, it was definitely not political. It was actually embarrassing, because the reason I was confronted with this is because I had IRS agents show up in my office, fully armed, asking for records. And then I discovered I had no authority to give them those records, and I had to work with DOJ on, having them work through a subpoena process until we could clean up actually having statutory language, which is in statute, actually, not in rule, that allows us to cooperate with law enforcement agencies with respect to releasing investigation records. Sorry, I have a four-legged friend in the background.
Okay.
And to follow up on that, maybe real quick. So that the existing is that in statute, Martin?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not enough. Like, we need this other layer, I guess.
It's different records. So the records that
Uh-huh.
are in statute are records that we get, for investigation of cases and things like that, and how we can share with law enforcement around those sorts of things. These are records that we get in relation to people applying for licensure. So we get a lot of records, from people applying for licensure that wouldn't be, they have different protections around them about like how those can be released and what laws apply to that. And when they should be released in what sort of circumstances. And so that's what these are about, is when those types of records can be released.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the policy as presented?
Actually,
Well, with the
no.
amendment.
So
There's
the
an
all that
amendment,
is
one sentence on the, sorry, there's one sentence on the very bottom of
Yes.
page 8.
yeah.
To do with patient records. If we could amend that out of there, please.
Yeah, so that's just the definition section. So it's not like, doesn't affect the document really in much way, but
Okay.
other than the fact that there is no reference in the document. But so those are just
Okay.
the definitions.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the document as presented with one minor edit.
And Logan Steele here, I second.
Thank you. All right. Any further discussion? Okay.
Yeah, I
Judge,
was just gonna say, I don't like it. It doesn't have actually anything to do with my views on immigration. Don't like what's going on at the federal level, but I don't feel like this is anything that's necessary at the Board of Accountancy. So
Yeah.
just a comment before we vote,
Thank
so
you.
there's some context there.
yeah, no, I think that's fine. All right, time for the vote. Joe,
Nay.
Logan,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Megan,
Aye.
Raul,
Aye.
Haley Lyons, aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Okay, last item, this was the added item, and I'm gonna make it snappy here. So last week, or maybe the week before last is really the right way, there was some language from a pretty sweeping deregulation proposal attached to House Bill 991 in Florida. This bill is a broader kind of community and rural development bill that has been prioritized by Florida's Senate leadership. But it has now slapped on a really substantial deregulation component to occupational licensing, including CPAs. It essentially excludes legal and medical fields. So the bill essentially eliminates the Florida Board of Accountancy. It eliminates any requirement for CPE. Well, not just the Board of Accountancy, a whole bunch of boards. Any CPE requirement, and then it requires an investigation or something on an alternative pathway to licensure where, and this may be editorial, the outcome is whether or not there should be any education requirements for licensure. So in theory, if that all happened, Florida licensees wouldn't be required to have any CPE. New licensees after this investigation component or study, it could be that they are able to be licensed with just exam and experience. And the oversight of the professional licensure will happen under another state agency. So there's some pretty significant like ramifications or challenges for CPAs and firms kind of operating in Florida and across state lines. And certainly you could extrapolate and say, if this gets the green light in Florida, that it could go in, be a hot topic in lots of other states. It's tricky because we've done a lot of work to maintain mobility in our profession and in our work with the UAA and, all of the, rules that we're putting in place. And so it's a little disheartening that this definitely could upend that. So the session ends on Friday. It's already passed the House. It's going to the Senate. Things are moving very quickly. The AICPA and NASBA are involved, but have been instructed by the Florida Society to not come in and flex their muscles, because that just further kind of fuels the fire. So there's some kind of campaigning against it through other means. But it is a big deal, and it has a lot of meaning, I think, nationally for our profession. So I just wanted to give you an update on that as the flames are fanning higher and higher kind of every day as we move towards conclusion of the session. So Martin or Sherry or Rachel, anybody want to jump in with any other commentary?
Substantively speaking, what's really hard here is not just the timing that all of this is supposed to come to a conclusion on Friday, but that same bill, because it's one of those legislative maneuvers that clobbers a whole bunch of things, kind of, depending on your perspective, all good or all bad or some mix in between, but basically clobbers a whole bunch of unrelated things into one bill. And actually, that one bill doesn't just contain that piece, it also contains the piece that the Florida Society actually wants and actually aligns with our Senate Bill 787, there is kind of all kinds of contradictory pieces in there. And the Florida governor doesn't have line item veto. So it's kind of once the legislative process, which is really the next 48 hours, kind of works its way through whatever ends up going on the governor's desk, it's either a no or a yes. There is no right. And so that's what makes the next 48 hours really, really critical. And there are some signs from early this morning that maybe there are some things that is now happening Senate side that is not yet happening on this bill, but is starting to happen with other bills where kind of bills are taking back apart again, and there's a little bit more consideration of here are the good parts, here are the bad parts, and let's pull them out. So there's some hope that that could still happen to this bill, but it's super edgy right now because the impacts of this, depending on how this plays out, could hit us much broader than just Florida.
Sherry, did you come off mute?
I took myself off just so I'd be ready, but I mean, I think both of you have explained that very thoroughly and well. Just separately, North Carolina also had a bill that they've been looking at that relates to CPE. Well, not even just CPE, but it's the reduction of continuing education. And, you know, my understanding that was like a 50% reduction. And so we've been monitoring that as well. And that would not be for CPAs, you know, for boards of accountancy only.
Right.
More sweeping.
That's the update. So as you see that percolating through, just some background on how that's all shaken out. And this group may have to be more engaged on that topic if that comes to pass, just in terms of how we deal with mobility for our state. So, all right. Any other comments, questions for the good of the order? Seeing none, our next regular board meeting is Thursday, June 5th. Have a good May.